video comes from Reddit user Katie201105, who was driving with her boyfriend when they came about 2 inches from hitting whatever this thing is. Katie said it wasn't a deer or a dog, nothing they'd ever seen in their life. Here it is zoomed in a bit. Now, watching closely, you'll notice the thing seems to suddenly appear. So as the car ahead drives by, the thing just kind of materializes. Now, as for what it is, I don't know. It doesn't look like any deer I've ever seen. A lot of commenters say it looks like a skinwalker or a rake. Whatever it is, it doesn't look right. Reddit user No Stairway Denied was working as a cashier at a grocery store when she had an encounter that stuck with her for years. A woman came through her line, normal looking, well dressed. Nothing unusual. She bought a couple things, handed over her payment, and the Redditor turned to put the money in the register, like she'd done 1,000 times before. When she turned back with her change and receipt, she told the customer to have a nice day, and that's when the woman's eyes changed. They looked completely different, as if she'd lifted some invisible shutter. Her face still looked polite, but her eyes, it was like they weren't human anymore. In No Stairway's words, they looked pure evil. The customer immediately noticed the startled reaction on her face and smiled, entertained by how terrified she'd made her, almost like she'd done it on purpose. But then the woman blinked, and just like that, her eyes looked normal again. She nodded, still smiling, and walked off like nothing happened. The Redditor went straight to customer service to ask for a break. In the smoking room, she sat, shaking, trying to process what she'd seen. The more she thought about it, the more she felt like she hadn't been looking at a normal person at all. Her only conclusion, that woman was something evil. And what disturbed her most was how the mysterious woman seemed to want her to see it, like she was relishing in scaring her. Our next story comes from a now deleted Reddit user who had a bone-chilling encounter with what she called a possessed patient. I worked in a hospital years ago and was taking care of someone. He was young, early 20s. I wouldn't say that he wasn't human, but I definitely think he was possessed by something that wasn't. During an encounter, he made a face at me and growled. His entire face distorted into something our faces just can't and don't do. I thought it was just me who saw it, but there were 2 staff members behind me at the time, and it happened, and they both took several steps back when he did it. His face distorted into a demon. I don't know how else to describe it. His brows arched, his eyes turned black, his smile spread to his ears. No one talked about it until I brought it up to one of my colleagues at the end of the day. She just looked at me and said, "I've been working in this field for over 30 years, and I've never seen anything like that in my life. I believe the help he needs is a bit beyond us. Be careful with that one." Alright, this next one is a lot more subtle, but it's just got this eerie vibe about it. It comes from Redditor CheesecakeLow2879, who said that about a week after they moved into their apartment, someone knocked on their door. It was a tall man in a suit, wearing a long black coat, holding a briefcase. What threw them off was the way the man leaned in. Instead of bending forward like a normal person, he kind of tilted sideways, almost unnaturally, and he handed out a leaflet. The leaflet seemed to be about funeral planning or something like that. The man then gave the Redditor this unnerving smile and asked, "Have you thought about your future?" There was this uneasy tension in the air now, and the Redditor just wanted this interaction to end. So they told him, "No thank you," and shut the door. Still a little freaked out, they put their eye up to the peephole, and this is the part that really gets me. Instead of walking away, the man just stood there in the hallway, staring at their door with that unsettling grin plastered on his face. He stood there for about 3 minutes before finally making his way back down the hall. A few days later, the Redditor spotted the man walking down the street again. That was the last time they ever saw him. The whole encounter, the strange posture, that unnatural smile, the fact that he just stood there staring at the door, it made the user think of something trying to imitate a person, but not quite getting it right. Have you ever heard of the black-eyed children? Maybe sitting in a parking lot late at night when suddenly you hear a tap on your window. Maybe you'll wake up in the middle of the night to a knock at your door, and there they are, usually politely asking for directions. They're kind of pale maybe, but aside from that, they look like regular kids. It's only when you really look at them that you notice their eyes. Pure black from lid to lid, no whites at all. Stories about them have been floating around for years, and almost everyone who tells one of these stories says the same thing. They felt this sudden wave of dread. Most trace the whole legend back to 1996, when Texas reporter Brian Bethel wrote about 2 kids he met in Abilene. He said their skin looked pale, their eyes were completely black, and something about the encounter left them all shaken up. Another one of the more well-known stories comes from Vermont. It was a snowy evening when an elderly couple heard 3 loud knocks at their door. They opened it. 2 children stood there, a boy and a girl. "Parents will be here soon. May we come in?" they asked. The couple let them inside. They were innocent children, after all. The kids sat on the couch while the wife made some hot cocoa for them. The husband tried asking questions, but they didn't really answer. That's when the wife noticed their cat was acting strangely, hissing and growling at the children. Then the boy asked, "May we please use the restroom?" The wife looked at them more closely for the first time, and that's when she saw their eyes, which she described as black as a starless universe. She directed them to the bathroom, though, and turned back to her husband. He was now covering his face with his hand. When she asked what was going on, he showed her blood running from his nose. Before she could react, power cuts out. The wife starts making her way down the hall to the bathroom, and that's when she hears a voice, which whispered at the end of the hall, "Her parents are here." The children then left, leaving the door wide open behind them. Outside, she noticed 2 tall, slender men at the end of her driveway. She waved. They didn't wave back. The men and the children then drove away together, and in the days that followed, 3 of their 4 cats disappeared. The 4th was found dead, and the husband suffered ongoing nosebleeds that led to a diagnosis of aggressive skin cancer. This bizarre story comes from a now deleted Reddit user. I'll just call this one No Toenails. They write, "I worked as a receptionist at a hotel, and I remember one time around Christmas and New Year's, there was this very strange man staying at the hotel. He'd always stand and talk to me every night for hours in a stilted, bizarre manner, saying things like he was best friends with Princess Diana, that he worked on top secret robotics products, and that he worked with machinery 100 years advanced of our current technology. I thought the guy was mentally ill. Gave me very strange vibes and really creeped me out. And one day he started saying that he was in fact the robot that he'd built himself. He was saying things about how he wasn't a human and how he learned everything from observing and listening and talking to real humans. I was like, okay, this guy's off his meds or whatever. Not unusual to see crazy people in this hotel, so I was pretty used to it, to be honest. Then he started talking about how the only way people ever found out he was not a human was because he didn't have any toenails. Well, on New Year's Eve, he came out of his room in his pajamas, no shoes or socks on, and sure enough, his feet were smooth like plastic. His toes were pristinely clean, and he had no toenails. Wasn't prosthetic feet or anything, just totally smooth skin with no toenails at all. His skin all over was perfect, not a spot or scar or freckle or wrinkle. And the guy otherwise had the appearance and demeanor of someone in their 70s, but the supple skin of a 17-year-old. Thinking about this guy still creeps me out to this day. And if anyone I've ever met in my life was a non-human entity, this guy was it. Some people have woken up to find someone, more like something, standing in their room. It's tall, completely dark, and always wears a wide-brimmed hat and a trench coat. It's known as the Hatman, a shadowy figure with no face. He stands in corners, at doorways, or lurks in closets, watching silently while you just lie there frozen. The sight of him can be terrifying enough to feel like the breath is being pressed out of your body. Reports of the Hatman began spreading online in the late 2000s. A blog called the Hatman Project collects people's accounts, and the figure has even made it into documentaries. Now, similar shadowy figures have appeared in stories all over the world from all across history. Sleep paralysis demons. But why do so many people see this particular figure, a man with a wide-brimmed hat? Could there be more to these Hatman stories than just cases of sleep paralysis? And back in 2014, a Reddit user named LordQuas187 was riding through Minneapolis with a car full of friends. They were heading down to Lake Street in a packed Honda Pilot when the group stopped at a red light. Everything was normal until someone in the back suddenly yelled, "What the F is that thing?" All of them turned to look. Moving along the sidewalk was a woman unlike anything they'd ever seen. Her skin looked so dark it didn't seem real. He described it like her whole body had been coated in Venta black. Her hair was all wild and tangled, her clothes were nothing but torn rags, and the way she moved. She wasn't walking so much as crawling, twisting along the ground, her limbs bending in angles no one's arms or legs should make. At one point she slowly turned her head toward their car. He said her eyes looked like pure chaos, like something completely unhinged. Everyone started screaming. The second the light turned green, they just floored it. Some of the girls cried for almost 20 minutes afterward. The guys were shaken too, and even though none of them keep in touch anymore, Redditor swears that if he ran into any of them today and mentioned that woman on Lake Street, they'd all give the same answer they thought they saw. We have Rapture talk. This was really stupid, wasn't it? The amount of people who not only fell for this, but were legitimately preparing for it, going as far as to sell all their assets. It just makes me deeply concerned for the fate of humanity. Not in a biblical sense, in like a we're so dumb and have no idea how to save ourselves kind of sense. If you avoid social media or you're watching this in the future, well, back in September of this year, TikTok exploded with the hashtag Rapture Talk, all around a South African preacher named Joshua Malekela, predicting the world would end on September 23rd or the 24th, and there were people going all in on this. Some were selling their cars, quitting their jobs, leaving notes for whoever was left behind with instructions on how to survive the apocalyptic hellscape that would surely await all the non-believers. Robert Cornwall, a minister, explained that this kind of makes sense when the world feels chaotic, with political instability, the economy in the toilet, wars, and just an increasing uncertainty. People get drawn to the idea that, well, Jesus might swoop in and just save them before the hard times hit. Matthew Gabriel at Virginia Tech added that apocalyptic predictions always spike when life feels messy. Not too surprising. When the dates passed, though, without anything happening, most of us were like, yeah, y'all knew we were going to wake up this morning. Other people cried or did some heavy coping by trying to find other ways to reinterpret the prophecy, which sociologists say is a pattern that's been repeating for hundreds and hundreds of years. Predict, fail, reinterpret, and then predict again. We never learn. Back in the 80s, a guy named Montekim Miller started a group in Colorado called the Concerned Christians. At first, it was meant to push back against New Age religions and what they saw as anti-Christian ideas, but over time it morphed into a doomsday kind of cult. Miller claimed he was the prophet of the Lord and that God spoke through him. The group became obsessed with interpreting world events through the Bible. They believed the collapse of the Soviet Union marked the time of the end. And then in 1998, Miller predicted a massive earthquake that would wipe out a city. It didn't happen, but instead of giving up, members packed up and moved to Jerusalem. Between 60 and 80 people vanished from Colorado around October of that year. By January 1999, Israeli authorities arrested and deported them during a crackdown called Operation Walk on Water, aimed at protecting a mosque from extremist Christian groups. In 1999, at least 100 members of a religious cult vanished in northern Colombia after heading to the Sierra Nevada mountains, convinced a UFO would save them from the end of the world. Relatives told reporters that their loved ones left willingly. One mother told reporters at the time, quote, "My daughter told me she had to leave because a cataclysm was going to occur, and that she had to go to a high place to meet extraterrestrials who would save them from the end of the world," end quote. The group, known as the Stella Maris Church, described itself as Gnostic, and they split into two groups over a weekend to make the trek. Police said reports came in that the members had disappeared, but said there was no sign of, a mass unaliving or coercion, so no search was launched. Some family members accused Rogelio Pera, the head of the cult, of taking advantage of his followers, forcing them to cut ties with their families and swindle them out of property. A woman named Mariela Tovar told the press, quote, "Two leaders told my daughter Liliana that she was God's chosen one and made her change her name to Stella Maris to brainwash her. She was convinced she was going to make contact with flying saucers." Harold Camping was a Christian radio preacher who kept predicting the world was going to end. Obviously, he kept getting it wrong. Back in 1994, he said it would happen in early September. When that didn't happen, he changed it to the end of September, then moved it to October. His biggest prediction came in 2011. He told his followers that May 21st was the day Christ would return and all non-believers would face eternal punishment, saying, "Well, the spiritual judgment happened on May 21st. We've all been assessed. They're getting everyone's paperwork together, but get excited because in October, that's when the physical rapture is gonna happen." Well, May 21st came and went, and nothing happened. When October rolled around, the world was still spinning, and Camping had already quit his radio job a few days earlier. Back in the 1840s, a man named William Miller, a farmer turned preacher, got it in his head that Christ was coming back. It worked out that the second coming would happen sometime between March 1843 and March of 1844. People took him seriously. Tens of thousands sold their farms, dressed in white robes, and climbed hills to watch for Jesus. When March 21st, 1844 came and went, and nothing happened, Miller admitted that he'd messed up the exact timing, but still insisted that the prophecy itself was real. So he and his followers reevaluated things, this time picking October 22nd of 1844. That day went down in history, though, as the Great Disappointment. Most of them just gave up on Miller and walked away. Yes, some. Others still stuck around for some reason and decided maybe Jesus didn't show up on Earth like they predicted, but had come in some spiritual way instead. That's that reassessing thing. Eventually, this led to the start of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is still around today. Herbert W. Armstrong was the guy who started the Worldwide Church of God. He was obsessed with figuring out when the world would end. He called out multiple dates over the years: 1936, 1943, 1972, and 1975. His most famous prediction came in 1956 with a booklet called 1975 in Prophecy. Basic summary: Christ is coming and the world as we know it is about to end. Some seriously believed the apocalypse was right around the corner and started preparing their lives for it. When 1975 rolled around and the world didn't explode, they were just so disappointed. Some left the church, others stuck around and tried to rationalize it. Armstrong didn't admit he was wrong, but the church slowly started shifting focus. Instead of specific doomsday dates, they leaned more into, all the other stuff in the Bible there is to talk about. Even with all the failed predictions, though, Armstrong stayed in charge until he died in 1986. Back in 2007, a Russian doomsday cult called the Penza Recluses, also known as Heavenly Jerusalem, decided to completely cut themselves off from the world. Founded by Pyotr Kuznetsov, the group broke from the Russian Orthodox Church, saying it wasn't strict enough. They banned processed food, TV, money, passports, and barcodes because they believed all those things were linked to the devil. And I can see the argument for pretty much everything on that list. I'm not saying I agree, but I can see it. TV, Satan's coming through the media to get you, money, obviously, greed, but passports? Satan want you to take that trip to Cancun? In November of 2007, though, about 30 members holed up in a cave, convinced the world was ending in May of 2008. Kuznetsov wasn't with them, though. He'd been arrested, but he told them to stay hidden, pray, and just wait. Police and the news camped outside the cave through the freezing Russian winter, worried the group might try to blow themselves up if anyone tried to intervene. By late March 2008, the first members started leaving. 7 women were treated by emergency workers. 3 days later, 14 more came out after melting snow caused part of the cave to collapse. Kuznetsov ended up in a psychiatric hospital, reportedly attempting to take his own life after realizing his prediction had failed. Some of the cult members died inside the cave, which then released toxic fumes as the bodies decayed. By May 16th, the last 9 members finally came out. The cave was later destroyed for safety reasons. In the early 70s, a music teacher named Marshall Applewhite met a nurse named Bonnie Nettles, and that meeting changed their lives forever. Applewhite had just lost his job and gone through a rough divorce, and Nettles was deep into astrology, seances, and a bunch of other weird crap, so they hit it off instantly, both convinced that they'd known each other in a past life. Nettles told them that their meaning had been foretold by beings from another world, and from there the two built an entirely new belief system. They started calling themselves the Two, and told people they'd been chosen to fulfill a prophecy, that they were the 2 witnesses from the book of Revelation. They said Earth was about to be recycled, and that only those who transcended their human form could reach what they called the next level, a higher plane of existence where extraterrestrial beings lived. They preached this all across the US, gathering a small group of followers who gave up their possessions, families, fashion sense, and names. After Nettles passed away, though, Applewhite continued to lead the group, now called Heaven's Gate, believing they'd soon reunite beyond this world. And by the mid-90s, the group moved into a mansion near San Diego, waiting for a sign. When Comet Hale-Bopp appeared in 1997, Applewhite told his followers that a spacecraft was trailing behind it, their ride to the next level. This all culminated with them taking their own lives, in one of the most infamous mass self-inflicted unalivings in modern history. In 1953, a Chicago housewife named Dorothy Martin claimed she was getting messages through automatic writing from an alien named Sananda. who was basically a higher form of Jesus. Sananda warned her that a massive world-ending flood was coming on December 21st, 1954. Martin quickly gathered a small, dedicated group known as the Seekers. We're told that on the night of the flood, a flying saucer would land to rescue them, lifting the faithful to safety while everyone else drowned. The followers quit their jobs, sold everything they owned, and cut off all their skeptical family members. They huddled at Martin's house on the evening of December 20th, removing all metal objects like zippers and belt buckles to avoid interfering with the saucer's magnetic field. Of course, logical. Sell all your stuff because you're about to die. I just don't understand these people. Anyway, they waited all night, midnight passed, then dawn on the 21st, and the world was still there. But in the awkward, tired silence, Martin had a breakthrough. She claimed Sananda sent a new message. The group's extreme faith had actually saved the world. Their collective light was so powerful that God had called off the catastrophe. Hooray, they all said. Hey, maybe they were right. Maybe we should thank them for this. In 1997, a journalist named Michael Drosnin released a book called The Bible Code. His whole claim was that if you skipped letters at certain intervals in the Hebrew Bible, you could uncover hidden messages predicting future events. And the code had been written by aliens, of course. The big prophecy was that a global nuclear war would kick off in 2006. His book sold pretty well. I mean, Warner Bros. Even purchased the rights to it. We're going to produce a movie, but the script was never approved. Apparently, it was kind of out there. Not really sure what they were expecting. Well, 2006 came and went with no nuclear war. Most people were not surprised, especially all the mathematicians and computer experts who just tore his book apart. One of them, Dr. Brendan McKay, showed that if you used Drosnin's exact technique, you could find hidden prophecies in basically any book. Just to make a point, McKay found the phrase "the code is a fraud" hidden in the same Bible text Drosnin had used. May 26, 1828, a teenage boy appeared in the streets of Nuremberg, Germany. He was stumbling around, barely able to walk, barely able to speak. He had 2 letters on him, both unsigned, saying he was a foundling. At first, people assumed he had some kind of disability, but once they started taking care of him, they realized something different was going on. He was physically strong, he learned things incredibly fast, his memory was exceptional, and he had this natural talent for drawing and music. Then Hauser started explaining where he'd been, and the story he told was disturbing. He said he'd spent his entire life, 16 years, locked in a dark underground cell, completely isolated from everyone and everything. He claimed he was fed nothing but bread and water, aside from the substances he was given to keep quiet. His only human contact was with one person, some mysterious figure who taught him a few basic phrases, and that was it. The mayor went public with the story, and suddenly everyone was talking about this boy they were naming Hauser. Rumors started spreading that he wasn't just an abandoned child. People believed he was actually a kidnapped prince, swapped at birth as some sort of conspiracy to alter the line of succession. But unfortunately, Hauser's life didn't get any easier. He was attacked multiple times. In 1829, someone gave him a deep gash across his forehead. He blamed it on a mysterious man in black. And then in December of 1833, someone lured him into a park and attacked him with a blade. And this time, he didn't survive. So, who was this mysterious Hauser? Where was he really from? To this day, we still don't know. His tombstone reading, "Here lies Caspar Hauser, riddle of his time, his birth was unknown, his death mysterious." The Count of Saint Germaine appeared in European high society around 1750. He's got to be one of the most mysterious, eccentric people in history. He showed up at French royal courts and other elite gatherings, sometimes using different names like Marquis de Montferrat. People described him as incredibly wealthy and cultured. He was a composer, a philosopher, a writer. He impressed pretty much everyone that he met. What made him legendary was his claim that he discovered the secret to eternal life. He said he was hundreds of years old. When he spent time with nobility, he would recount historical events with such precise detail that people started believing that he'd actually been there. He spoke multiple languages fluently and talked about life hundreds of years ago like they were just recent memories. And on top of that, he supposedly had deep knowledge of alchemy. There were claims he could change lead into gold. Another odd thing about him, people noticed he rarely ever ate in public, which just kind of added to his mystique. It was like he was this larger-than-life entity who just wasn't bound by normal human biology. The Count died in 1784, officially anyway. See, for hundreds of years after, people claimed to have seen him. As recently as 1972, a man named Richard Chanfray appeared in Paris claiming to be the Count. He even went on French television and supposedly turned lead into gold using a camping stove. George Adamski basically founded the modern UFO contactee movement. It was right during the height of Cold War paranoia. Adamski was a Polish-American writer who claimed that in 1952 he met a friendly extraterrestrial named Orthon in the California desert. Orthon became the prototype for what people call the Nordic alien, essentially a being that looks completely human with blonde hair, attractive features, except supposedly not of this world. According to Adamski, Orthon was from Venus. Adamski went on to write 3 best-selling books describing his encounters with Orthon and his trips aboard their spacecraft, visiting Venus and various other planets. By 1960, his books had sold over 200,000 copies. The big message Orthon was supposedly trying to get across was that humanity was on the brink of destruction, mostly due to atomic weapons. Yeah, very much of its time. And a lot of these reports from the 50s shared this exact same message. And that's an interesting thing about these types of stories. The visitors from these other worlds almost always reflect the deepest anxieties society is going through at any given time. I think that's very telling. On November 2nd, 1966, a sewing machine salesman named Woodrow Derenberger was driving home near Parksburg, West Virginia, when a large gray object suddenly appeared and blocked the highway. A tall man with dark hair emerged from the craft and walked directly toward Derenberger's car. The man introduced himself as Indrid Cold. Thing is, he wasn't speaking to Derenberger out loud. He seemed to be communicating telepathically. He claimed to be a, quote, searcher from a planet called Lunalos, somewhere in what he called the galaxy of Ganymede. The most unsettling detail about this story is the man's face. He had a permanent fixed smile, but it wasn't friendly. It was unnatural, emotionless, almost like an alien's best attempt at appearing human. Derenberger described it as deeply unnerving. This wasn't the last time he'd encounter Indrid Cold either. Derenberger claimed that Cold contacted him repeatedly after that night and that they had ongoing telepathic conversations. Derenberger also said he was taken to Lunalos on 2 separate occasions. Other witnesses also came forward. Multiple people confirmed seeing this strange smiling man speaking with Derenberger on the side of the road that first night. In 1863, on a quiet beach in Sandy Cove, Nova Scotia, a young boy named Collie Albright discovered a man lying in the sand. The man was in terrible condition. Both of his legs had been amputated below the knee. The wounds had partially healed, but they were still raw. The cold was close to killing him. Collie ran for help, and villagers carried the man back to town to try and save him. Once they got him stable, they tried to figure out who this guy was, and they got nowhere. The guy barely spoke, aside from the occasional mumble, which didn't even sound like English. Villagers tried every other language they could think of: French, Italian, Spanish, Latin, and he just gave them nothing. If someone bothered him too much, he would growl like an animal. When someone asked what his name was, he seemed to mutter something that sounded sorta like Jerome, so that became his name. They thought maybe he was a sailor, but his hands were soft, not the rough, calloused hands of someone who'd worked on ships. Collie's family couldn't afford to care for him permanently, so Jerome was moved from household to household. Eventually he was taken to the French community Matagan because people assumed he might be Catholic. He spent years living with a man named Jean Nicolas, and later the Como family, who actually charged admission for people to come see him like he was some sort of circus act. Jerome died in 1912, never having explained who he was or where he came from. The Starseed movement is a lot bigger than most people realize. These are people who believe their souls originated in other star systems. They claim they reincarnated on Earth with a specific purpose: to help humanity evolve spiritually, to raise its vibration, prevent war, or guide the planet into some higher form of existence. It's a bunch of BS, but the movement has exploded online. You'll find plenty of starseeds on TikTok, countless videos with titles like 10 Signs You're a Starseed or Why You Never Felt at Home on Earth. And some people claim they actually have memories of past lives on other planets. The whole thing grew out of older New Age philosophy and has now merged with all this internet self-help culture. Now there are starseed retreats, coaches, people who speak what they call light language, which they claim is how their souls communicate across dimensions. Now, to be fair to some of these people, some of them just view it as a kind of metaphorical thing. They just feel kind of different or alienated from mainstream society and don't actually think they're from another planet, which is fair enough. I'd place myself maybe in that camp as well. But others do take it very literally. Onek claims she's from Venus. Not metaphorically. She says she was born there and lived on Venus for hundreds of years before coming to Earth in 1955 as a 7-year-old girl. According to her, she arrived here on a spiritual mission to help humanity evolve. Her book, From Venus I Came, describes the civilization on Venus in detail. She talks about their cities, how society is run. For decades, she's given lectures and interviews, presenting herself as an ambassador from Venus. Now, there's an obvious problem here. By the 50s, scientists already knew that Venus was hot enough to melt lead, so not exactly a place that could support life, but her explanation for this is that her people exist on this higher vibrational frequency that our basic technology just can't detect, a place beyond our physical reality. And finally, David Huggins doesn't just claim that aliens exist or that he saw one once. He says he's had an ongoing relationship with one for most of his life. According to him, his first encounter happened when he was just a young boy. Over the decades that followed, he says he's fathered dozens of hybrid children with a female extraterrestrial named Crescent. Huggins documents everything through painting. This home is filled with hundreds of paintings depicting his experiences, scenes of Crescent visiting him, his weird hybrid alien children, encounters with other small gray alien beings. His artwork attracted enough attention that a documentary was even made about his life called Love and Saucers. What stands out about Huggins is how matter-of-fact he is when describing these experiences. He talks about them the way you'd describe a past relationship. He doesn't present it as traumatic. He's not saying he's been given special abilities or knowledge of the future. It just is what it is.
Do you think your last walk home was odd? In January 1950, Miss E.F. Smith left a cocktail party somewhere in Scotland, and during what should have been an uneventful walk, she claimed she saw torchlit figures digging bodies in the snow. Her mind said Pictish warriors from the 7th century. She insisted that she was fully conscious, not dreaming, and watched as these figures worked in the dark and cold, moving bodies, turning them over, then continuing onward. The scene felt ancient and violent. When dawn broke and she made it back to modern streets, she described being emotionally shaken for days. That case stands out because she wasn't drifting into a prettier past. She claimed to witness something gruesome and real in an unexpected zone of time. In the early 1970s, 3 men working for a cattle feed company in Oklahoma, Carl, Mark, and Gordon, were sent to retrieve a feeder from a remote pasture near Ponca City. They claimed that on the first night they saw a large 2-story white house near a barn, silent and unlit. The next night they went back. The house was gone. No foundations, no rubble, nothing remained. They swore it wasn't demolished in the interim, just vanished entirely. What makes this case intriguing is that all 3 men confirm the same odd memory and the very stark disappearance. Was that White House a ghost from another time, or did they slip into a timeline where that house still stood? You're driving along a familiar route and suddenly a junction you know should be there just isn't. That's exactly what one motorist claims happened to him somewhere between Hawkshead and Coniston in the Lake District of England. He says that he drove past the spot several times, turned around, retried, but that turning, signposts, the map route, all vanished. Instead, an unbroken stretch of hedgerows, meadows, and emptiness stretched where the junction should exist. He knew the route well. He knew there should be a turning, yet that day reality had removed it. Eventually, he reached Coniston by a massive detour. Some treat this as a spatial illusion, but time slip enthusiasts see it as a moment when roads and time itself rearranged. On a bus tour through the French countryside, some tourists spotted an elegant, old-fashioned hotel. They asked the driver to stop, disembarked, walked into the lobby, chatted briefly, and stayed the night. But when the bus returned the next day to pick them up, nothing was there. The road, the building, the hotel, they all vanished. What's more, locals in the area claimed they never knew of a hotel in that location. Photographs the tourists took were fuzzy or failed to develop properly. The whole thing feels like a pop-in from another time. To this day, it's just one of those was it real stories that vanished just as quickly as they appeared. One night, two young women set out to walk a few miles to a village dance. The road twisted, the darkness thickened, and they suddenly found themselves in a landscape they did not recognize. A terrain that felt older, wilder, more primitive. They struggled to cross fields and woods that seemed misaligned with familiar paths. When dawn approached, they re-emerged onto known territory, but in between, they say they passed through terrain that no one alive seemed to know existed. No maps, no signs, just a forgotten sliver of land. Some say they walked through a hidden fold in time, landing briefly in an alternate geography. This is a more intimate, personal claim rather than one in the newspaper. The author of The Carolinians Archives claims that, as a child in Georgia, he and his family often visited an old motel restaurant south of Interstate 85. Years later, when he tried to revisit it, the motel was gone, replaced by strip malls and fast food. But he also claims episodes of time-slip recollections tied to that place. Odd dreams, fleeting ghost stories, night visions of doors that open in impossible ways, places shifting behind walls. He says the place in memory sometimes feels more real than the modern version, as if the motel had flickered between eras. It's the kind of weird personal anomaly that makes you question how much of your memory is tied to time itself. Another story from travelers. A bus carrying tourists was driving, and passengers saw an elegant, welcoming hotel on the horizon. The bus stopped, people got off, walked in to ask, spent time inside, but when the bus retraced that route minutes later, the hotel was gone. The road it had been alongside looked different. Some tourists claimed windows, doors, elegant lobbies, but others saw nothing. It's similar to other disappearing hotel stories, but more dramatic because it involves a moving group, not just one or two people. The shared witness aspect definitely adds some weight to this very weird story. In 1957, 3 British naval cadets on training duty reportedly stumbled into a silent, deserted medieval village in Suffolk. They saw houses that looked centuries old, heard church bells that then stopped abruptly, saw no modern wires or features, and felt an oppressive silence. No bird song, no wind. After about 25 minutes, the scene snapped back and they were once more surrounded by modern surroundings. Cars, wires, and countryside. The villagers later confirmed that no such remote medieval village had existed in that precise place in recorded history. It's definitely just a classic ghost village in time scenario. In the 1970s in Great Yarmouth, England, a man claimed to enter a shop to buy envelopes. The assistant was dressed in Eduardian style, the prices were ludicrously low, and the whole place felt stuck in the past. A few weeks later, he returned and the shop was modern, with standard merchandise, and the assistant wore modern clothes. What's odd is that the envelopes he bought were types that had ceased production years earlier. That implies that either he slipped into a time when those envelopes were still sold, or the shop had become a mini time capsule for a moment. It's a small case, but one that lingers in odd collections of time slip lore. This one is a little bit more recent, and this one comes from Reddit. A family staying in a motel in the US in the Utah region claimed they experienced something bizarre. The sun set, they began dinner, then fireworks burst in the distance, except their clocks read 7 p.m. Within minutes, their phones jumped to 12:15 a.m. All family members report confusion. The kids thought they were early, the parents tried to rationalize it as clock malfunction, but every phone, every watch jumped to the future at once. Afterward, the world looked night dark, as if hours had passed. Whether this was a glitch in perception, a mass hallucination, or something even more bizarre, it remains one of those weird, personal anomalies that people whisper about in paranormal forums.
A lot of people have described waking up in the middle of the the night and realizing they can't move. They're fully awake, their eyes are open, but their body feels frozen. And while they're stuck like that, they notice someone or something standing nearby, usually a dark shape, like a shadow with a human outline. Could be at the foot of your bed, could be at the corner of your room, or sitting on that creepy rocking chair you inherited from grandma. This happens during what's called sleep paralysis. It's when your mind wakes up before your body does, leaving you aware but kind of paralyzed for a bit. It doesn't always come with hallucinations, but when it does, it is downright creepy. You may also have auditory hallucinations, like hearing footsteps, breathing, whispers, and on top of all that, you'll usually feel pressure on your chest as if someone is sitting on you. Glad to say I haven't experienced this in a long time, but when I was a teenager, it was pretty routine, and I would see stuff sometimes. There have been studies that have found a lot of people see things because parts of the brain that sense movement and proximity misfire, basically tricking you into thinking someone's there. It's like you're on that line between the dream world and reality. You can't move, you can't scream. Every instinct is telling you there's something in the room with you. I mean, it's no wonder so many old legends talk about demons showing up in people's rooms in the middle of the night and sitting on their chests. One of the most common things people have talked about, basically ever since people started telling each other stories really, is hearing footsteps when no one is there. Today you mainly hear about this phenomenon happening at supposedly haunted locations, right? But people report it a lot in day-to-day life too. Usually it's creaking or even clearer paced steps across the floor above you or down the hallway, up the stairs. That's the worst. There are practical explanations for this, old wood floors expanding, air pressure shifts. You could have animals in your attic or just a straight up stranger living in your house. That's been known to happen, but sometimes these things don't have a clear explanation. There are those cases when the sound is just too specific and you think, those were footsteps up there. I know they were. A slow, deliberate pattern of steps, even a change in direction sometimes, but you check every room and there's nothing. This happened to me recently. I was staying at a friend's house, and they're always hearing weird footsteps from above them. And one day we heard something that was so clear, and I was like, I gotta check. I grabbed a ladder from the basement, went up because it sounded like it was in the attic, and I went up there and there was just nothing. Keep in mind, this is a detached house. It's not like it's connected and you're hearing the neighbors. So yeah, I don't know. It's weird. Here's another campfire story trope. Doors opening by themselves, chairs that shift when no one's nearby, lights turning off at random, basically objects moving on their own. Nowadays, TikTok and YouTube are full of footage like this. Is it all unexplained or even genuine? No, but not all of these are hoaxes either. A door moving slightly can obviously happen when there's a breeze. It can also be uneven flooring and stuff like that, but what about when there is no clear explanation? Again, at that same friend's house, I think it's haunted. I don't know. I don't really believe in ghosts, but I do know I can't explain everything. Sometimes she'll say, even when the door is closed, she'll go to open it, and the lock will shift, almost like someone's actively trying to keep her from coming out. I don't know. It's a creepy house, I'll say that. You'll hear this one a lot too, even from people who've never believed in the paranormal. Random chills, and I mean ones that really seem to get under your skin. Out of nowhere, the air drops cold and suddenly you have goosebumps. Maybe you'll even smell something too, like perfume or tobacco, for no obvious reason. People who are into the paranormal will probably tell you that these cold spots or sudden scents are caused when a ghost is nearby because they drain energy and heat from the air around them. Ghost hunters usually bring temperature readers or thermal cameras to track this kind of thing, and if they see a big temperature drop out of nowhere, they think it could mean something supernatural is going on. This next one's always frustrating. You're out somewhere, a coffee shop, train station, whatever. Your eyes glance over someone. Then you take a beat and you look at them again, and you're like, do I know that person? She looks like, I don't even know who she looks like, but I feel like I've met her before. You're almost certain you've seen this person, but there's no real reason you should have. The brain even tries to fill in who they are. Did you see them at the gym? Did you take a class with them years ago? Or are they an old coworker? It's strange, because, you'd think you'd remember if you knew someone from work, even if it was years ago. And you wouldn't think you'd remember someone you just saw once or twice at the gym randomly. So why do we have this nagging feeling like you've met? Well, this comes from your fusiform gyrus, the part of your brain that processes faces. Sometimes it misfires, picking up features that seem familiar and tricking your mind into thinking you recognize a random person on the street. Neuroscientists call it a false sense of familiarity, and it's actually pretty common. It's the same system that helps us recognize friends instantly, but occasionally there can be a glitch. I didn't know that until today. So you set your keys on the counter, you walk away for a minute. When you come back, they're gone. You search everywhere, your pockets, all your drawers. Where the hell did your keys go? How many of us have been in this situation before? I mean, it happens all the time. And even weirder, occasionally you'll hear people tell you that hours or sometimes days later, whatever they misplaced is suddenly back exactly where they remembered leaving it. Sounds insane, but it happens, and unless you're experiencing the early stages of dementia or you have carbon monoxide poisoning, it's hard to come up with a satisfying explanation other than just faulty memory, which isn't really satisfying. It's been documented in memory studies, but not completely explained. But a lot of researchers think stress and routine can make your brain sometimes autofill things, like assuming you placed something down when you actually didn't. But you've done it so many times that your brain just sort of tricks you into thinking you did this time. Still doesn't account for stories where multiple people saw the item vanish or reappear, though. I have another story about this one. I've told you this one years ago, but I was staying at my ex-girlfriend's place, my girlfriend at the time, and we had a pillow, a very recognizable one because it had a band logo on it. Anyway, one day this pillow goes missing, and we search up and down that apartment for that pillow. We look everywhere, and we just assume it's gone somehow, right? And then months go by, and she sends me a text with an image, and the pillow is sitting right back on the couch where it was. She'd just gone down to do the laundry, comes back, and all of a sudden, it's there. And now, obviously, what I think happened is someone came into that apartment and took that pillow and then brought it back, which is kind of worse, but it's also like, yeah, that's one of the worst things that's ever happened to me. I mean, I love that story, but it is, and other weird stuff happened in that apartment too. We would hear footsteps above, even though nobody lived up there. We once found a whole bunch of pictures she had hanging on her wall. They all fell off in like a perfect stack. We found a pan sitting in the middle of the kitchen perfectly too. That's kind of a bunch of stuff on this list. Footsteps, objects moving, items disappearing and reappearing. Creepy stuff. Now, most people get deja vu once in a while, that weird flash where something completely ordinary suddenly feels like it's already happened before. It's not just like a weird moment for everyone though. Some describe it like reality briefly glitching, and some have said that momentary deja vu we often get can go on for minutes or even hours. I'm pretty skeptical about the hours. Minutes, maybe. I've come close for sure. It's always unsettling because it's not dramatic, but it is eerie how exact deja vu is. Only you just don't know what that exact really is. You try to compare the current moment to something that may have happened earlier in the day or the week, but you just can't think of anything. It's just the current moment. You feel like it's already happened, but at the same time, you're experiencing it for the first time. Scientists think deja vu happens when the brain's memory circuits misfire. The hippocampus and temporal lobe, which handle recognition and memory, get confused and treat the present moment as a remembered one. But even with a logical explanation, people still report moments that feel too exact to brush off. You hear a friend say a sentence word for word, but along with that, the background noise, the way the light hits the room, your own reaction, it's all eerily familiar. This is one of the oldest, most primal feelings we have, the feeling of being watched. You're alone in an office, or you're walking through an empty parking lot at night, heaven forbid the forest. Every cell in your body tells you someone is looking at you. You quickly turn your head only to see nothing. And then you tell yourself, and of course there was nothing. I'm being paranoid. The thing is, we're wired for this, to sense the gaze of others, or at least be aware that someone could be watching us. It's a survival instinct passed down from the dawn of time, and we often think people are watching us even when they're not. Research in 2013 published in Current Biology found that people have a natural bias to think someone's gaze is directed at them, even when the eyes are hard to see, like behind sunglasses or partially averted. Your brain usually just assumes someone is looking at you. It's not a vanity thing, I mean it can be, but it's really just your brain being alert. That's why that gut feeling of being watched can feel so real even when no one is there. I'm lucky enough to have never experienced this one, at least while not under the influence. Missing time. This is one of the most chilling things people will report because it messes with the most basic thing we rely on, time. Say you're driving home from work, fully alert, and you glance at the clock. The next thing you clearly remember is glancing at the clock again, but somehow a full hour has passed. You've covered 20 miles, but you have no memory of the journey. Psychologists have documented this as a form of dissociative amnesia. It's triggered by extreme stress or chronic fatigue, where the brain just skips recording events. But people will often say there's no feeling of having fallen asleep or drifted off. There's just this mysterious gap. The unsettling part is realizing that your brain was piloting your body, carrying out complex actions like driving and navigating traffic, while your conscious mind was seemingly not involved. And finally, we have one we kind of touched on earlier, but I want to go into more detail on phantom scents. And I don't mean common, easy to explain stuff like, a barbecue smell. That's easily explainable. I mean, you're sitting at your office desk or you're standing in your kitchen and you suddenly get hit with this vivid, distinct smell, a specific old cologne your dad used to use maybe, or you're suddenly reminded of your childhood friend's apartment you haven't been to in decades, and you realize it's because a scent has hit your nose. You know that smell. It's connected to a person, a memory, but there's absolutely no source for it in the room, at least not from what you can tell. Medically, this is called phantosmia, or a smell hallucination. It could be caused by a sinus or nasal issue, head trauma, migraines, epilepsy, but sometimes it happens for no clear reason. This is Nguyen Thi Phuong in both pictures. No, this is not a young woman standing next to her grandmother, and no, these images were not taken decades apart. Phuong was just 23 when she went through one of the weirdest medical mysteries ever recorded. One day in 2008, she had a bad allergic reaction to some seafood. Her face swelled up, her skin got itchy, but instead of going to a doctor, she treated it herself with herbal medicine and some sort of steroid medication over the counter. Well, this was a big mistake. Within months, her skin started sagging, her face wrinkled up, and suddenly she looked like an old woman. By the time she was 29, she looked like she was pushing 80. Only her face aged, the rest of her body was totally normal. She could still move like a young woman, her voice stayed the same, and her energy levels were fine for the most part. Just from the neck up, it was like she had aged 50 years overnight. Doctors had a few theories. Some said it could be lipodystrophy, a rare condition that messes with fat distribution in the skin. Others blamed Cushing's syndrome, a hormonal disorder that can cause premature aging, but the most likely culprit was the substances she took to treat the allergic reaction. Long-term use of certain unregulated substances can cause skin thinning and rapid wrinkling, and it seemed like Phuong had been using them for years. Even with all the media attention though, her case never got a clear explanation, and to this day people debate whether it was purely medical or something more mysterious. A curse, some kind of supernatural punishment? Well, probably not, but when you look at these photos, it's hard to believe this was just an allergic reaction treated wrong. Whatever happened, Phuong became one of the most disturbing real-life cases of someone aging overnight. Huska Castle isn't your typical medieval fortress. It wasn't built to keep invaders out, protect a king, or even house nobles. It was built to seal something in. Found in the Czech Republic, Huska Castle sits in the middle of nowhere, miles from any strategic location. It has no water source, no defensive walls, and no kitchens. All things that you'd expect from a proper castle. That's because it was supposedly built over a massive bottomless pit, and locals believe was a gateway to hell. Before the castle was constructed, villagers would whisper about all sorts of terrifying tales. They'd claim to hear inhuman screams echoing from the pit, and heaven forbid you found yourself close to it at night. It was said that winged beasts would fly out of it and drag you down below. Desperate for answers, authorities came up with a test. A rather cruel test. They decided to offer a condemned prisoner a deal. Be lowered into the pit and report what you see. In exchange, you can be set free. Well, the man agreed, and they started lowering him down, deeper and deeper and deeper. They patiently waited for any sign of distress, but it was just quiet, till suddenly it wasn't. The prisoners started screaming in terror. They raced to haul him back up. When they finally did, everyone recoiled in shock. The man looked completely different. It looked like he had aged decades. His hair was white, his face had these deep wrinkles, and he had this look of pure horror on his face. He died soon after, babbling about monstrous creatures waiting below, and that was that. To stop whatever was inside from escaping, Huska Castle was built over it, with a chapel positioned at the center, right above the pit. Next up, we have the tale of Marie Antoinette's hair. The story goes that it turned white overnight. It's become one of the most famous parts of her tragic history. Legend says that just before her execution, Marie Antoinette's hair went completely white in a single night. This supposedly happened after she was imprisoned during the French Revolution and was faced with the terrifying reality of what was about to happen. On the night before she was about to be killed, the pressure and emotional turmoil just so intense that by morning her hair had changed color and that it had no color anymore. It's said that she went to sleep with dark hair, and when she woke up, it was completely white. In the 1950s, a traveling salesman named Richard Walden disappeared for 3 days while on a routine business trip in rural Pennsylvania. When he was finally found wandering along a highway, he looked years older than he'd been just a few days before. His black hair had turned white, his skin was loose and aged, and he spoke with the weary voice of an old man. When asked where he'd been, he only said, "I knocked on the wrong door." Later, authorities traced his last known location to some dilapidated farmhouse deep in the woods. Inside, they found an old table set for dinner, but the food was rotten, covered in dust. The house had been abandoned for decades. Richard refused to say anything more. He died 6 months later, looking nearly 90 years old, despite only being in his 40s. In Japanese folklore, there's an old legend about a fisherman named Urashima Taro. It's one of Japan's oldest folk tales, first recorded over 1,000 years ago. Urashima Taro was just a regular fisherman, till the day he made a choice that would cost him everything. One morning he saw a group of youngsters tormenting this small turtle on the beach. Feeling bad for the little thing, he stepped in, scared the bullies off, and set the turtle free. That should have been the end of it, but the next day, a much larger turtle appeared and told him that the one he'd saved was no ordinary creature. She was a servant of Ryujin, the dragon king of the sea, and as thanks for his kindness, Taro was invited to the legendary dragon palace beneath the waves. He accepted. The stories say he spent his days in paradise feasting, drinking, and being entertained by Ryujin's daughter, the beautiful Princess Odahime. It felt like a dream, but he had no idea how much time was passing. Eventually, he started getting homesick and decided to leave. The princess was disappointed, but she gave him a parting gift, a mysterious box. She told him to never open it. When he returned to shore, everything had changed. His home was gone. The village was different. The people, the clothes, even the way they spoke. It was all unfamiliar. Confused, he asked around. That's when he learned the truth. He thought he'd only been gone for a few days, but 300 years had passed. Desperate for answers, he forgot the princess's warning and opened the box. Thick white smoke poured out, wrapping around him. In an instant, he collapsed. His skin wrinkled, his back hunched, his hair turned white. The box had contained his lost time. Urashima Taro aged 300 years in seconds, and then he was gone. Now, most toys get old, but not like this. So yeah, this doll right here supposedly didn't always look like this. It aged quite poorly, mind you. Now, this didn't happen over the course of a night, but for a doll, any aging is fast. The story goes that a little girl had a favorite doll she took everywhere. It had soft, rosy cheeks, bright blue eyes, and golden curls. But like most childhood things, it eventually got left behind, tossed into an attic, and forgotten. Years later, her parents were clearing out old junk when they found the doll again, only something was wrong. It had changed. The bright eyes were now sunken and dull. Its plastic skin had yellowed, shriveled, and wrinkled like it had aged. The golden curls were now brittle and white, like an old woman's hair. Freaked out, they got rid of it. A collector claimed to have bought it, only to find that months later, it had changed again. It looked ancient now. The Battle of the Somme was one of the most brutal and unrelenting conflicts of World War I. The British soldiers who fought there were thrown into the chaos of constant shelling and brutal trench warfare. One of them, a man in his 20s, ended up being part of this nightmare. He was young, full of life, eager to serve his country, but when the battle started, everything changed. The first few days were pure hell. with the constant explosions and artillery fire rattling everyone. And then one day, during a massive bombardment, he was knocked out cold by a shell blast. He finally came to. Hours had passed. His head was spinning and his body was aching. He felt frail. When he finally made it back to his unit, no one could quite place what had happened, but his friends did notice this change in him right away. He didn't look like the same guy who'd enlisted even. He was slow, tired, and his eyes had this distant, exhausted look, like he'd seen a lifetime of horrors in just a few weeks. The soldier didn't talk much about what happened. He kept fighting, but everyone could tell something was off. It wasn't like he just looked older, it was like the war had stolen years from him. After a while, he was sent home. His body was just too worn out to keep fighting. What happened to him after that, no one really knows. As to whether this particular story is 100% true or not, one thing is clear: trauma has been known to age people significantly. Most people think aging is just about time, wrinkles, gray hair. You get slower as the years go by. But for some, aging doesn't come gradually, it hits all at once. Sometimes the cause isn't time, but trauma. There are real cases of people who have been through something so physically or emotionally intense that it seemed to steal years from their life overnight. One of the most well-known examples is prisoners of war. After just a few months or years in brutal conditions, some former POWs come back looking decades older than they should. Scientists have found that extreme stress can damage the body on a cellular level, shortening telomeres, which are the protective caps on DNA that determine how fast we age. The more stress someone endures, the faster their body deteriorates. But trauma doesn't have to be physical. Emotional shock can do the same thing. There are stories of people experiencing horrifying events, like losing a loved one suddenly, surviving a disaster, or being in life or death situations, who then wake up the next morning with white hair, a sunken face, and sometimes deep wrinkles that weren't there before. For those who go through it, this kind of accelerated aging isn't just cosmetic. The body actually wears down faster, leading to a higher risk of disease and even a shortened lifespan. Time might march on at the same pace for everyone, but for some, a single moment of terror or suffering is enough to accelerate the clock.
Now, this first case is very, very strange. In 1880, a farmer named David Lang reportedly vanished into thin air while walking across a field on his property near Gallatin, Tennessee. There were multiple witnesses, including his wife, his 2 children, and 2 visitors arriving in a horse-drawn buggy. They said Lang was mid-step when he literally just disappeared. There was no flash of light, he hadn't fallen or gone behind a tree, he was there 1 second and then he wasn't. The group ran to where he'd been standing, expecting to find a sinkhole or some kind of trap in the ground, but the earth was solid. They searched the area for days. Neighbors joined in, but no sign of Lang was ever found. The only thing that changed was the grass where he had vanished. It turned sort of like it decayed. It turned yellow and brittle, and for years afterward, nothing would grow there. Then, months later, Lang returned. Sort of. His daughter was playing in a field looking for 4-leafed clovers, and that's when she heard it. A voice that sounded a lot like her father, calling for help. It was faint, like it was coming from underground or from behind a wall. It happened more than once, but each time they checked, there was still nothing. Eventually, even the voice stopped. The story was pretty well known at the time. It showed up in the newspaper, and the names, place, and details were consistent with public records. Was it fabricated? Maybe, but everyone there that day remained adamant about what they saw. In 2006, Carol Chase McKelney was driving through Riverside County, California, on her way home from a dog show. As she passed through her old hometown of Riverside, she figured she'd take a quick detour to see the neighborhood she grew up in. It had been years since she visited, and she was curious to see how much it had changed. Except, it wasn't her town. The street names were right, the general layout looked familiar, but her childhood home was completely gone, and so were all of the houses around it. The neighborhood had totally changed, like it had been wiped out and replaced with strange, unfamiliar buildings. She went to look for her grandmother's house, gone too. Her old school was nowhere to be found. Even the cemetery where several family members were buried didn't look the same. The graves were different and the whole place just felt wrong, like a dream version of her hometown. Completely shook, she got out of there, and it wasn't until years later that she felt the courage to come back. But this time, everything was normal. Her grandmother's house was there, her childhood home too, the school, everything was just like it always had been. So, what happened? Carol was completely sober, not tired, not on medication. She knew what she saw and what she didn't see. She swore up and down that for a few strange hours, she stepped into some alternate version of her hometown, a place almost like hers, but not quite. In 1978, 23-year-old Stephen Kubacki was a college student studying German at Hope College in Michigan. One February afternoon, he went cross-country skiing near Lake Michigan and never came back. The next day, his skis and backpack were found near the edge of the frozen lake. There were footprints leading out onto the ice, and then nothing. Search and rescue teams looked for weeks, but no trace of him was ever found. Everyone assumed the same thing, that he had fallen through the ice and died. Except, 15 months later, he showed up. Stephen woke up on a grassy hill in a field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, over 700 miles away from where he disappeared. He was wearing clothes he didn't recognize, with a satchel full of maps he didn't remember collecting. He had a t-shirt from a marathon in Wisconsin, which he didn't recall running, and his last memory was being on the ice. He walked to his aunt's house nearby and from there eventually reconnected with his parents. Nobody had seen or heard from him in a year and 3 months, but all things considered, he looked healthy. He was just confused like everybody else. When asked what happened, Stephen said he had no idea. He didn't remember anything. It was like someone had hit a reset button on his brain. To this day, he still doesn't talk much about it, and after the incident, he went back to school, earned a degree, and eventually became a clinical psychologist, which is kind of wild considering he's got one of the strangest unsolved disappearance stories on record. But I guess also maybe that makes him the perfect person for the job, you know? In March of 2017, Bruno Borges, a 24-year-old psychology student from Brazil, vanished without a trace. His family had last seen him at their home in Rio Branco, and when they realized he hadn't taken his phone, wallet, or anything useful for a getaway, they went into his locked bedroom. And that is when things got really strange. The entire room had been turned into some kind of cryptic research lab. The furniture was gone, replaced with a giant statue of a 16th century philosopher who believed in infinite worlds and extraterrestrials. There were also pages and pages of handwritten text covering the walls, floor to ceiling. Over 14 books worth written in a bizarre code nobody could read. Bruno's family had no idea any of this was going on. He'd apparently been working on it in secret for months. When news about his disappearance came out, internet sleuths obsessed over his case. His encrypted writings were eventually partially decoded. They talked about personal evolution, contact with higher beings, and preparing humanity for something bigger. But still, no one knew where he went. But after 5 months of silence, Bruno showed up back home, barefoot. He wouldn't say much about where he'd been, only that he'd been working on his ideas. His family and police said he was in good health, mentally stable, and not on any substances. He didn't really give interviews, and most of the public still doesn't know why he left or what exactly he was trying to do. In 1935, British Royal Air Force officer Victor Goddard was flying a biplane over an abandoned airfield near Edinburgh, Scotland. I think that's how you say it, and everyone in the comments is gonna be like, that's not how you say it. Well, I'm not Scottish, so I don't know what you want me to do. The place was falling apart, overgrown with weeds, buildings crumbling, not a soul in sight. A few days later, he flew the same route again, but this time, something was off. As he approached the airfield, a sudden storm hit. Thick, swirling clouds, heavy rain, turbulence. Then, just as fast, the sky cleared. Everything looked brighter. unnaturally so. The airfield below was no longer abandoned, the buildings were intact, freshly painted, planes were on the ground, yellow ones, which wasn't the standard RAF color at the time, and mechanics in blue overalls were moving around, working on them. None of this made sense in 1935. The colors, the uniforms, the specific model of aircraft he saw, they weren't part of the Air Force yet. When he told people what he'd seen, they thought he was just confused or mistaken. But a few years later, during World War II, that same airfield was brought back to life. It was restored, the planes were painted yellow, and the mechanics wore blue coveralls, just like Goddard had described. It was as if he had seen the future. No one could explain it then, and no one really can now, and Goddard wasn't some nut. He was an air marshal. Dead serious, no nonsense, and he swore up and down till his death that this actually happened. In 2008, a woman named Lorena Garcia from Spain woke up and immediately felt something was off. At first, it was little things. Her bed sheets were different, her pajamas weren't the ones she remembered putting on the night before. Confused, she chalked it up to grogginess and just got ready for work. But when she got to the office, the weirdness escalated. She'd been working at the same place for 20 years, but when she arrived, she realized she didn't work in the same department anymore. She was listed under a completely different role, one she swore she'd never been assigned. Her boss, her coworkers, the whole structure was different, but it got worse. She reached out to her ex-boyfriend, who she'd broken up with months earlier, only to find out that they'd never broken up at all. According to him, they were still together. The man she had been dating, who she'd just seen a few days ago, was nowhere to be found. His number didn't even work. It was like he never existed. Lorena genuinely believed she'd woken up in a different version of reality, one nearly identical to her own, but with very key differences. She went to doctors, psychologists, everyone she could think of trying to explain what happened, but no one had an answer. She was healthy, her memory was sharp, yet her life didn't match her memories. And to this day, Lorena insists that she's from somewhere else, that she somehow crossed into a parallel dimension and has been stuck here ever since. In May of 1972, 4 girls from Southern Utah University were driving home after a rodeo when they took a shortcut through Gadianton Canyon, near the Utah-Nevada border. Around 10 p.m., the road beneath them changed from black asphalt to smooth white cement. The desert landscape gave way to unfamiliar grain fields and towering pines, not at all what they expected in southern Utah. Thinking they were lost, they turned around. Then they spotted a small roadside tavern and pulled over to ask for directions. Before anyone could get out, one of the girls screamed. Heading towards them were 4 strange egg-shaped vehicles with tricycle-style wheels and glowing lights. The girls, completely panicked, jumped back in the car and tore off through the canyon. As suddenly as it started, the strange scenery disappeared and the road returned to normal. They eventually crashed into a creek, damaging her car and flattening 3 tires. At dawn, they hiked to the highway and flagged down a trooper named Victoria Lindquist, who was shocked and confused to find that their tire tracks ended abruptly 600 feet into the desert. And despite being found miles from the road, no one could explain how they got there. One hubcap was also missing, which was never found. Back in the 1800s, there was a man named William Cantello, an eccentric British inventor obsessed with creating a rapid-fire automatic weapon. After years of work, he told his family he was heading to the market to sell his invention, and he never came back home. Roughly 20 years later, an American inventor named Hiram Maxim rose to fame with, you guessed it, a rapid-fire automatic firearm. Maxim also looked strikingly similar to Cantello, so much so that Cantello's own children were convinced he was their father. The resemblance became such a nuisance that Maxim addressed it in his autobiography, claiming someone had been impersonating him. Now, that may have been the case. It was just a coincidence that he not only looked just like another man, but also took up the same vocation. But some believe Cantello faked his disappearance and took on a new identity, or that Cantello and Maxim were the same person from 2 different realities, and at some point they switched places, leaving both men stuck in the wrong timeline. This has to be one of the strangest missing persons cases that I have ever heard. In 1763, in a quiet English town of Shepton Mallet, a man named Owen Parfitt vanished without a trace. He was old, frail, and paralyzed. He couldn't walk, couldn't dress himself, he barely moved. Locals say he was a former sailor with a shady past, but by the time this story takes place, he was basically bedridden. Well, one warm evening, Owen was sitting outside his sister's cottage, propped in a chair, enjoying the breeze. His sister and a neighbor helped him outside, then they went inside for a bit. They claimed they were gone maybe 15 minutes, and when they came back, the chair was there, still facing the road, but Owen was gone. Now, this wasn't a busy area. It wasn't like someone could sneak up, lift a full-grown man who couldn't walk, and then vanish without making a sound, but it seemed like that's exactly what happened. People searched the fields, wells, nearby roads. Nothing. Days passed, then weeks. Rumors spread. Some started to wonder if he'd just been faking the paralysis for years before finally deciding to... what? Wander off into the wilderness alone? I don't know. It's not a good option. The theories? I don't know. I've got no new ones. In 1961, a girl named Joe Duperalt went on what was supposed to be a dream family vacation, a week-long cruise on a rented sailboat in the Bahamas. But just a few days in, everything went horribly wrong. Joe woke up one night to the sound of footsteps and her brother screaming. When she went topside, she found the deck covered in blood. Her mother and brother were dead. The captain, Julian Harvey, was the only adult left standing, and when he saw her, he didn't say a word. He just stared. She went back below deck, terrified. Minutes later, water started flooding in. The boat was sinking. She escaped onto a small floaty and drifted alone for nearly 4 days under the scorching sun. Dehydrated, sunburned, and half-conscious, she was eventually rescued by a Greek freighter. The fact that she survived at all was almost a miracle. Captain Harvey was rescued days earlier in a lifeboat and told authorities that the boat sank in a freak accident. He said that everyone else was lost at sea, but when he found out Joe survived, he took his own life immediately. She never saw him kill her family, but everyone believes that that is exactly what happened, probably for insurance money. Still, there are holes in the story, and what Joe saw that night, she never fully talked about. Some say she blocked it all out, others think something even darker went down. Till this day, though, the case has never really been solved. There is a book about this, if you're interested. I think it's called like Orphan Lost at Sea or something like that. And also, if you're a fan of the podcast MFM, if you know, you know, in one of their recap episodes that they're doing right now, the rewinds, they just did this one like a few weeks ago, so go listen to that, read the book. The story's crazy, you guys. That's just crazy. This little girl's just lost at sea, then she's found, and everything was okay for her. And that's the important part of the story.